The morning sun was sharp that day, pouring its brilliance through the massive glass windows of the central bank. Every corner of the lobby gleamed as if polished for a royal reception. The marble floor reflected streaks of golden light that danced across leather shoes, shiny briefcases, and the restless feet of men and women who had come for their financial affairs. The air buzzed with low conversations, the tap of heels, and the muffled sound of fingers typing rapidly on glowing phone screens. It was the kind of place that smelled of money, prestige, and power. Everything from the tall digital screens flashing exchange rates to the guards in sharp uniforms at the door whispered authority. But beneath this aura of perfection, there lingered the constant impatience of those who believed their time was more valuable than anyone else's. And into this pristine scene stepped a man who seemed to belong to another world entirely. Mr. Harlan. He was tall, though his shoulders were bent with age. His gray beard flowed gently down his chest, the kind of beard that spoke of winters endured and summers survived rather than salon trims. His clothes looked worn, stitched and restitched over the years. A faded checkered shirt clung to his frame, its colors long devoured by sunlight and sweat. His jeans were frayed at the edges, carrying the scars of labor. On his head sat a straw hat, cracked along the rim, the only shield he had against the blazing heat outside. He walked slowly, his gait steady yet unhurried, as though he had learned long ago that there was dignity in patience. In his hand he clutched an old leather wallet, darkened and roughened from years of use, holding it the way a man holds both his past and present. The atmosphere of the lobby shifted as soon as he entered. Conversations faltered. A few eyebrows arched. Some customers glanced at him with faint amusement, while others looked away quickly as though ashamed to be caught staring. In this kingdom of suits and silk ties, Mr. Harlan's presence was like a gust of desert wind. He was used to it. This was not his first time in a bank, nor would it be his last. Yet the piercing stares always pressed on his chest like invisible weights. The wealthy in their crisp suits often looked at him as if he were an intruder, an inconvenience in their carefully curated world. Even the staff behind the counters sometimes avoided his eyes, serving him with a politeness so thin it barely covered their judgment. But today Mr. Harlan had come for something simple. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. He only wanted to check his account balance to ensure that everything was in order. If only appearances told the whole story. Because what none of them knew, not the customers sneering at his jeans, not the clerks suppressing their smirks, not even the ambitious manager in his glass cabin, was that Mr. Harlan was no ordinary man. For decades, he had built his life silently, stacking brick upon brick of effort, sacrifice and vision. He had never flaunted his wealth, never paraded his success. Instead, he chose to live humbly, moving through life as if the spotlight belonged to others. It was this very humility that had kept his true identity invisible to the world around him. He was not just a man with a balance. He was the owner of the bank itself. And yet, on this morning no one saw a founder, a builder, or a leader. All they saw was a tired old man in worn clothes. That was the tragedy of appearances and also their trap. As Mr. Harlan stepped into line, a pair of eyes spotted him from across the room. Eyes sharp, calculating, and dripping with arrogance. Those eyes belonged to Victor Morrow. Victor was everything Mr. Harlan appeared not to be. Young, sharp-featured, and brimming with the kind of confidence that often mistaken itself for power. His dark blue suit was tailored to perfection, his red silk tie a flash of ambition against the navy. His shoes shone like mirrors, his watch gleamed under the lights, and his hair was combed back as if even a single stray strand would be an insult to his image. Victor was the branch manager and he wore his title like armor. In his world, appearances were currency, and people like Mr. Harlan were bankrupt. From the glass office, Victor had been watching the lobby like a king surveying his court. When his eyes fell on the elderly figure in the straw hat, amusement curled at the corner of his lips. He nudged one of his clerks, whispering something that earned a chuckle. Then, with the kind of cruelty that feeds off an audience, Victor stepped out into the lobby. He walked like a performer approaching a stage, his polished shoes echoing with each step. Heads turned, attention shifted, and the anticipation of spectacle filled the room. Victor thrived on it. He stopped near Mr. Harlan, his voice loud enough for customers and staff to hear. "If you even have a balance, old man," Victor sneered, "I'll pay you double." The words sliced through the air, sharp and mocking. The lobby froze. Conversations died. Every gaze shifted to the frail figure standing in line with his old wallet. Customers leaned forward slightly, curious. The staff behind the counters exchanged knowing glances, waiting for the old man's humiliation. Mr. Harlan lowered his gaze. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. His shoulders bore the weight of quiet dignity, the kind that comes from years of weathering storms. It was not the first insult he had endured. It would not be the last. But what Victor and the rest of the lobby did not know was that the laughter ringing in their ears was about to turn into silence so thick it would choke them. Because the old man they mocked was the one person who held all their futures in the palm of his hand. The room held its breath after Victor's words. They had been delivered with such venomous confidence that everyone assumed the elderly man would shrink away embarrassed, perhaps even retreat without finishing his task. After all, how could someone dressed in faded denim and a frayed shirt possibly belong in such a polished environment? But Mr. Harlan did not flinch. His eyes, half hidden under the brim of his straw hat, remained calm. He did not meet Victor's gaze, nor did he respond to the murmurs now spreading across the lobby. Instead, he adjusted the grip on his old wallet, as though it carried not only his identification but also his patience, his dignity, and his silence. The clerk at the nearest counter, a young man with a crooked tie and restless eyes, called him forward. His voice carried an edge of amusement, no doubt fueled by Victor's challenge. "Next, please," the clerk said, though his smirk betrayed his expectation of entertainment rather than service. Mr. Harlan stepped slowly to the counter, his boots clicking softly against the marble floor. The crowd leaned forward, curiosity drawing them closer in spirit if not in body. He slid his worn wallet onto the counter and carefully withdrew his identification card. His hands, though calloused and aged, did not tremble. Years of labor had steadied them, and years of silence had taught them restraint. The clerk took the ID, still smirking, and began typing into the computer. His fingers clattered on the keys with exaggerated slowness, as if prolonging the inevitable humiliation for the old man. Behind him, Victor folded his arms, his confident smile spreading wider as he waited for the punchline he believed was his. But then something shifted. The clerk's smirk began to fade. His eyes narrowed, his posture straightened, and his tapping fingers froze mid-stroke. For a moment he thought he had misread the screen. He leaned closer, blinking rapidly, his mouth opening slightly. Then he straightened again, swallowing hard. The numbers on the screen were not only high. They were astronomical. This was no ordinary savings account, no pension fund, no modest nest egg from a lifetime of labor. This was wealth that defied ordinary imagination, enough to buy the entire building they stood in, enough to silence every sneer in the room, enough to make kings bow and bankers sweat. The clerk's throat tightened. His hands began to tremble as he reached for the printer, unsure how to proceed. He glanced at Victor, who was watching eagerly, expecting laughter. Victor caught the hesitation instantly. "Well?" he demanded, stepping closer. "Come now, do not waste our time. Does the poor man even have a balance?" His tone was dripping with mockery, every word a dagger thrown at dignity. The clerk hesitated, his voice faltering. "Sir, Victor, impatient, snatched the paper slip from the printer the moment it slid out. His laugh erupted before his eyes even touched the numbers. But the laugh was cut short, sliced mid-note as he read what was before him. His face drained of color. His eyes widened. The arrogance that had been so firmly planted in his posture began to crumble. His hands shook as though the paper burned him, the digits on it more dangerous than fire. Silence. The entire lobby felt it. The customers leaned closer, whispering to one another, sensing the shift in the air. The staff behind the counters exchanged nervous glances. No one knew yet what had happened, but they could feel it, something extraordinary, something irreversible. Victor's lips parted, but no sound came out. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving only shock. The man he had mocked, ridiculed, and humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses was no ordinary customer. He was no struggling worker hoping for a few dollars to cover his bills. He was the very foundation of the place they all worked in, the silent power behind the polished marble, the true owner of the bank itself. Mr. Harlan took the paper gently from Victor's trembling hand. He folded it with care and slid it into his wallet, the same way he had slid away insults all his life, quietly, without fanfare. Then for the first time he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and strong. It was not the voice of a man crushed by years of mockery, but the voice of one who had seen the world for what it truly was. "The real balance we carry," he said, his words slicing through the silence, "is not in a bank account. It is in how we treat others." The lobby froze again. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to stop. The echo of his words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Victor's chest tightened. His face flushed with shame, and for the first time in his carefully curated career, he felt truly exposed. Every polished surface around him, the marble floor, the glass windows, the mirrored counters, seemed to reflect his cruelty back at him. The laughter that once felt like power now rang in his ears as disgrace. The customers, once admiring his confidence, now eyed him with contempt. Staff members who had followed his orders now saw the truth. A man who bowed only to wealth and mocked humility. But the weight of humiliation was not yet complete. Because Mr. Harlan, having delivered his quiet thunder, turned to leave. His slow steps echoed against the marble, each one heavier than any reprimand. But just before he reached the door he paused. He turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the lobby not to judge but to teach. His voice, when it came again, was softer, warmer, yet carried an authority that needed no volume. "I grew up with nothing," he said. "Every dollar I earned came from sweat, from sacrifice, from patience. I built this bank not to make men arrogant, but to give families hope, to help workers achieve their dreams, to remind us all that respect must always come before wealth. If you see someone who looks worn, tired, or poor, remember this: you know nothing of the storms they have survived. Treat them with the dignity you would want for yourself." The room was still. Tears welled in the eyes of a young mother holding her child. An older man in the corner nodded slowly, pressing a hand to his chest. Even the most impatient businessman lowered his phone, struck by the weight of truth. It was as if, in that single moment, the entire world had shifted. And Victor Morrow, standing in the middle of it all, felt smaller than he had ever been. The silence Mr. Harlan left behind in the lobby was unlike anything the bank had ever known. When the doors closed behind him and his straw hat disappeared into the sunlight, the room did not return to its usual rhythm. There was no casual chatter, no impatient tapping of shoes, no hurried flipping of papers. Instead, a heavy stillness hung over the polished marble like a shadow that refused to lift. It was as if every person in that lobby, from the clerk still trembling at his desk to the young mother cradling her child, had been forced to confront themselves. The wealthy businessman who had looked down on the old man minutes earlier now shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his pride punctured. The clerk who had smirked when calling Mr. Harlan forward now avoided the eyes of customers, his face burning. Even the guards at the entrance, who had barely acknowledged the old man when he walked in, now exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they had stood in the presence of greatness without even recognizing it. And Victor could not breathe. He stood frozen in the middle of the lobby, his once proud posture bent, his carefully polished shoes rooted to the marble as though the earth itself refused to let him escape. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his mind spiraling through disbelief, fear, and shame. His arrogance, once his armor, had shattered like thin glass, leaving him naked before his staff and customers. But the humiliation did not stay in that lobby. By the afternoon, whispers had already begun to spread. Customers carried the story with them into offices, cafes, and living rooms. They spoke of an arrogant manager who mocked an old man, and of how the old man had revealed himself as the silent owner of the very bank Victor thought he ruled. The tale moved like wildfire, fueled by both disbelief and fascination. By evening, the whispers had become headlines in hushed corporate conversations. Executives and upper offices of the bank's towering headquarters had already heard fragments of the event. Each retelling exaggerated nothing, for the truth itself was enough. The manager had mocked the founder of the bank in front of staff and customers, and the founder had quietly taught a lesson that reverberated in every corner of the institution. Within days, Victor received a summons. It was not a polite request. It was a formal order to appear before the board of directors. The words in the email were curt, heavy with the authority he once believed only he could wield. His hands trembled as he read them, and for the first time since he had been appointed branch manager, he dreaded walking into the building he had once considered his kingdom. The boardroom was vast and imposing, lined with tall windows that flooded the space with morning light. At the head of the long mahogany table sat a figure that stripped the air from Victor's lungs. Mr. Harlan. But he was no longer in his straw hat and worn jeans. He wore a simple gray suit, modestly cut, with no glittering watch, no flashy tie. His humility remained, but now it was framed in the authority of his true identity. His weathered face was calm, his eyes steady, his posture dignified. Victor's throat went dry. He had mocked this man. He had laughed at him. He had turned him into a spectacle for entertainment, and now here he was, sitting at the head of the table as the founder, the CEO, the man whose name rested on documents Victor had never even seen. "Sit," one of the directors instructed. Victor obeyed, lowering himself into a chair that suddenly felt like a trial seat. His confidence was gone, replaced by a weight pressing against his chest. The meeting began without pleasantries. There was no need for them. The story had already reached every ear in the room. Victor's mockery had become not just a personal failing but a stain on the bank's reputation. One director spoke sternly about leadership standards. Another highlighted the damage arrogance could inflict on both staff morale and customer trust. Each word fell like a hammer against Victor's already fractured pride. He tried to form excuses, to mutter apologies, but his lips faltered, and his voice broke under the gravity of the silence surrounding Mr. Harlan. Finally, it was the old man himself who spoke. His voice was not angry. It was not loud. But it carried a weight that silenced every whisper of paper, every shuffle of chairs. Leadership, Mr. Harlan said, his eyes fixed on Victor, is not measured by how loudly you speak or how sharply you dress. It is measured by how kindly you treat the smallest voice in the room. The word struck Victor like a blow. His eyes fell to the polished wood of the table, unable to meet the gaze of the man he had once dismissed as worthless. His shame burned deeper with each second of silence that followed. You mocked a man, Mr. Harlan continued, because you believed he had nothing. But in truth, it was you who carried nothing, no respect, no humility, no understanding of what this bank was built for. This institution was never meant to feed arrogance. It was meant to give hope. You forgot that. And in forgetting, you disgraced not only yourself but the very foundation you swore to uphold. The board members sat in silence, their agreement written on their faces. There was no debate, no defense, no argument strong enough to erase what had been witnessed. Victor's resignation came swiftly. Whether it was demanded or offered, no one cared. The damage was done. His once bright career had crumbled, not through incompetence but through pride. Pride that blinded him. Pride that made him believe appearances told the whole story. Pride that collapsed in a single afternoon under the quiet thunder of truth. When Victor left the boardroom that day, he was not the same man who had once strutted across the marble floors of his branch. His suit felt heavier, his tie tighter, his shoes no longer mirrors of confidence but chains of regret. He walked out not as a leader, not even as a manager, but as a man stripped bare of arrogance, left only with the wreckage of what he had built on cruelty. Meanwhile, the staff at the branch began to see their work differently. The story of the straw-hatted man became a quiet legend among them. Customers walked into the bank with a new sense of reverence, whispering about the day the CEO himself had walked among them, humble and unnoticed, yet more powerful than anyone realized. For them, the event was not just gossip. It was a mirror. A reminder that true wealth lies in character, not clothing, in respect, not ridicule. And for Victor, it was the beginning of a long, painful reckoning with himself. The story of that morning refused to stay within the walls of the branch. By the time the sun set, it had already traveled far beyond the marble lobby. Customers carried it home, repeating it to their families over dinner. Clerks whispered it across desks in other offices. Within days it spread like wildfire, a tale too striking to fade, too powerful to ignore. And the retellings all carried the same unforgettable image. An elderly man in worn clothes, mocked for appearing poor, only to reveal himself as the silent founder of the very bank in which he stood. Everywhere people repeated the same words. They spoke of the arrogance of the young manager, of the stunned silence of the crowd, and of the humility of the old man who left behind not just a balance sheet but a moral lesson. It became a story not just about a CEO in disguise, but about the deception of appearances, the danger of pride, and the enduring strength of dignity. Life within the bank itself changed in subtle yet undeniable ways. The clerks who had once been careless with their words now carried themselves differently. The young man who had smirked when calling the old man forward never forgot the moment the balance filled his screen and drained the color from his face. He learned humility that day, and it stayed with him like a scar etched into memory. The guards at the door, who had barely noticed Mr. Harlan as he entered, now greeted every visitor with respect, no matter how modest their clothes. Even the customers noticed the difference. Politeness was no longer a mask, it was genuine, and it softened the atmosphere of the place. The board of directors, shaken by the humiliation of their own branch manager, introduced new training sessions focused not on numbers but on values. The words spoken in that lobby were repeated in meetings and printed on training manuals. Leadership isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how kindly you treat the smallest voice in the room. The phrase appeared on plaques, posters, and even near the entrances of several branches. The lesson was immortalized in writing so no employee could forget. And what of Victor Morrow? His fall was swift and merciless. His resignation was accepted almost immediately, his name scraped off the office door before the ink on the paperwork had dried. The man who once strutted across marble floors with polished shoes now left in silence, his pride shattered. Some said he left the city altogether, trying to rebuild his career elsewhere. Others believed his arrogance clung to him like a curse, ensuring he could never truly rise again. But no matter where he went, he could never outrun the shadow of that morning. His name became synonymous with humiliation, the cautionary figure in a story retold to remind others that pride collapses faster than it rises. For Mr. Harlan, life remained unchanged. He continued to walk humbly, to dress simply, to carry the same old leather wallet. He never sought the spotlight that others might have craved. He never held press conferences or gave interviews about the incident. He simply lived as he always had, quietly, with the dignity of a man who had never forgotten where he came from. Those who asked why he had allowed mockery to touch him when a single word could have silenced it received the same answer every time, accompanied by a gentle smile. Because the lesson is louder when spoken by actions, not by titles. Soon the story was quoted on stages by motivational speakers. Teachers told it to students as an example of respect. Community leaders used it in sermons, weaving it into lessons about character and dignity. What began as humiliation for one man became hope for thousands. And in every retelling, the focus was not on the money in Mr. Harlan's account, but on the wealth in his character. Years later, the story still lingered in the bank's branches. Near the main entrance, framed on the wall, hung a simple inscription: "The real balance we carry isn't in a bank account, but in how we treat others." To some it was just words on a wall, but to others it was a guiding principle that changed the way they looked at strangers. For those who had been present that morning, it was more than words. It was memory, etched forever into the silence of that lobby, into the trembling hands of a clerk, into the flushed face of a man brought to his knees by his own pride. Even years later, new clerks who joined the bank were told the story during orientation. They listened wide-eyed as senior employees described the old man in the straw hat, the humiliation of the manager, the thunder in a voice that never once rose in anger. They were reminded that arrogance destroys but humility builds. That appearances deceive but character never does. For Victor the lesson had come too late. But for countless others, it arrived just in time. The incident became a parable, a living legend passed from one generation to the next. It reminded them that wealth fades, appearances mislead, pride falls, but dignity endures. On quiet afternoons, when sunlight once again poured through the glass windows and streaked the polished marble floors, some clerks imagined the moment replaying itself, as if the ghost of that morning still walked with them. They pictured the man with the gray beard and the straw hat, walking with the weight of silence yet carrying the strength of truth. They remembered the hush that fell over the crowd, the trembling voice of a clerk, the moment the world turned upside down. And they remembered what lingered when the doors closed behind him. Not fear. Not shame. But the undeniable truth that the greatest balance a man can carry has nothing to do with numbers. It lies in respect, kindness, and dignity. Mr. Harlan had left them with more than a story. He had left them with a legacy. A reminder that no matter how high marble walls rise or how polished glass windows shine, they mean nothing if the people inside forget the value of treating others with humanity. And so, the old man with the straw hat lived on, not just as a CEO, not just as a wealthy man, but as a symbol. A living proof that true wealth cannot be measured in digits, but in the way one treats the smallest, quietest voice in the room.